Ilsa's landing was not a place anyone in the galaxy had reason to know. It sat on the cold northern shoulder of a world called Tarn, 61 years old, 214,306 souls, and it made almost nothing that anybody wanted. Grain, mostly. Hard winter grain grown under 12 kilometers of pressure domes that glowed at night like a chain of paper lanterns strung along a black river. Ice, cracked out of the polar shelf and sold cheap to the tramp freighters that came through on the long haul between real destinations. There was a glass bridge over the Kettle River that the first settlers had built out of fused silica because they had more sand than sense. And every autumn the town painted it, and every spring the frost took the paint off again, and every autumn they painted it anyway. That was Ilsa's landing, a bridge nobody needed, painted by people nobody watched. On the morning it ended, a woman named Adaeze Okonjo was standing in front of 31 children in a schoolroom that smelled like wet wool and chalk, teaching them the names of the stars they could see from the observation deck. Not the catalog numbers, the names. She was old-fashioned that way. She believed a thing without a name was a thing you could lose without noticing. Her son Teal was 11, and he was not paying attention. He was drawing a starship in the margin of his slate, a lopsided thing with too many engines, and beneath it he had written, in the careful blocky letters of a boy who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by his own handwriting, Adaeze's ship. His sister's ship. His sister, who was 23 and gone to the fleet and sent messages home every 11 days without fail, and who had promised she would be back for the winter festival, and who had told him, swearing him to secrecy, that she would let him sit in the pilot's chair. He was drawing that chair when the sky changed. The 9th Correction Fleet of the Vhelt Sodality came out of transit at 8:47 local, 340 warships in a wedge so precise it looked painted onto the sky. And they did not hail, and they did not slow, and they took up a low orbit that put them directly over the domes. Over Marshal Sethus Vor, who commanded them, had been given a file 40 hours earlier. The file said that a human settlement on a world called Tarn lay across a transit easement that the Sodality had claimed under the 3rd provision, and that the humans had been notified, and that the humans had responded by filing an objection with the Assembly. An objection, a piece of paper. Sethus Vor had read the phrase twice, and his crest had flattened in the way that meant contempt, and he had said the sentence that would eventually be carved, in 11 languages, into a slab of black stone on a world he had never visited. Then let them file another. He gave them 40 minutes. That was more than the provision required. He was, in his own understanding of himself, a merciful officer. He broadcast the notice in the trade tongue, on an open band, and he watched the little lights of the domes and waited for them to do what species did, to scream, to beg, to scatter. 40 minutes is not long enough to evacuate 214,000 people from a planet. It is not long enough to evacuate 400. Ilsa's landing had 11 ships on the ground, and 9 of them were grain hoppers with no life support to speak of. The colony administrator, a man named Oilaren who had been elected because nobody else wanted the job, understood the arithmetic in about 11 seconds. He did not scream. He did not beg. He opened the town channel and he said, "Get the children to the hoppers. Everybody else stay where you are. Don't run. Don't crowd the doors. We are going to do this properly." And they did. This is the part the galaxy would never understand afterward, because the galaxy had never bothered to look. 214,000 human beings, given 40 minutes to die, formed lines. They formed lines at the dome hatches, and they passed the children forward hand to hand over their heads, and the grain hoppers took 812 of them, which was every seat and every square meter of every cargo bay, and about 200 more than the hoppers were rated for. And the last child put aboard was a 2-year-old handed up by a stranger who never gave her name to anyone. Adaeze Okonjo walked her 31 students to the hatch in a line 2 by 2, holding hands, the way you walk children anywhere. She counted them onto the hopper. 31. And then Tio at the ramp turned around and would not go. There is no recording of what she said to him. The hopper's cabin logger caught the audio of the bay, and in the bay there was only noise, engine spooling, people breathing, someone praying in Yoruba, someone else counting in Mandarin, and then a boy's voice, cracking, saying "Mum," and a woman's voice, very calm, saying something too quiet for the microphone. Then a thump as she put him aboard. Then the hatch. The hoppers burned for orbit at 9:31. The Vhelt did not fire on them. Sodality had specified in his orders that fleeing vessels were not to be engaged. The provision was concerned with the settlement, not with the settlers, and he was a lawful officer, and he wanted the record to show it. Later, at his trial, his advocates would return to this fact again and again, as though it were a coin he could spend. At 9:37, the 9th Correction Fleet opened fire. They used kinetic dispersal, clean, cheap, thorough. Rods of dense metal dropped from orbit at 11 kilometers a second. The first flight took the fusion plant, and the second took the waterworks, and the third took the domes. And the domes did what pressure vessels do, which is that they came apart all at once, and the winter air of Tarn, which is 200 degrees below the freezing point of water, went in. It took 19 minutes. The glass bridge over the Kettle River survived the first 11 flights. It stood there over the frozen water, fused silica, painted that autumn a deep, unfashionable green, while everything around it turned to steam and gravel. On the 12th flight, a rod came down 200 meters upstream, and the shockwave took it, and it fell into the river in pieces, and that was the last thing on Tarn that anybody had built. Sodality made his transit at 11:04. He filed his report on the way out. The report was 11 lines long. It used the word correction 4 times and the word human once. The assembly at VAR took up the matter 9 days later. The assembly was the closest thing the galaxy had to a conscience, which is another way of saying it was a room where 400 species argued about ore quotas. It had a great domed chamber, and a bell, and a book, and a procedure. And the procedure was very old and very good at producing outcomes that nobody had to be ashamed of individually. The Terran Compact's delegate rose and spoke for 11 minutes. She was a small woman with a flat, exhausted voice, and she did not shout, and she did not weep, and she read the number, 214,306. She said that 812 had survived. She said that among the dead were 490 school-aged children whose families had elected to stay together. She said the word murder once at the end, and then she sat down. The Vhelt advocate rose and spoke for 2 hours. He was extremely good. He established that the 3rd provision permitted the clearance of unregistered habitation from a claimed easement. He established that notice had been given, a notice which, he conceded with a graceful dip of his throat fan, might have been of insufficient duration, and for that the Sodality expressed its sincere and formal regret. He established that no fleeing vessel had been fired upon. He established, with a small dry sound that in his species indicated a point delicately made, that the human objection filed with the assembly had not yet been docketed at the time of the action, and therefore had no standing. And therefore, in the strictest sense, the matter had never been before this body at all. He used the phrase, a regrettable regional adjustment. He used it 4 times, and by the 4th time nobody in the chamber flinched at it, because that is what language is for. The assembly deliberated for 6 hours. Its ruling ran to 3 pages. It found that the Sodality had acted within the letter of the 3rd provision, but had shown insufficient regard for the customary intervals of humane notice. It levied a fine of 400,000 tons of refined ore, payable over 11 years, to be held in trust for the surviving population of Ilsa's landing. It expressed its condolences. It recommended that the Sodality review its notice protocols. It moved to the next item on the agenda, which concerned a dispute over fishing rights in the Bellamy Drift, and which took 9 hours. Outside the chamber, an attaché of the Sether Republics named Kelthanu Riss stood at a window and watched the human delegate walk out alone across the plaza. He had been assigned to observe the humans for 6 years, and he had written in his last assessment that they were a young species of no great strategic consequence. 91 worlds, 30 billion people, 3 centuries in space, and a navy. He had checked this twice of 2,940 hulls, most of them customs cutters and revenue ships and survey boats. A coastal fleet. A fleet for chasing smugglers. He watched the delegate cross the plaza. She did not hurry. She did not look back at the dome. He wrote in his private log that night, "They took it well." He would spend the rest of his life trying to explain that sentence. The Terran compact ship *Second Wind was a customs cutter, 91 meters, 19 crew, and on the day Ilsa's landing died, she was 411 light-years away, sitting in a cold orbit over a slush moon, inspecting the manifest of a Sether grain hauler that had almost certainly been shaving its tonnage declarations for 6 years. Lieutenant Adaeze Okonjo was in the hauler's number 2 hold with a scanner, and a bad attitude when the message came through. She was 23. She had a boarding officer's clipboard, a jacket 2 sizes too big that she had inherited from a bosun who had retired, and a habit of humming when she counted. She had joined the fleet at 18 for the most ordinary reason there is. She wanted to see things. And she had discovered that the fleet mostly consisted of counting other people's boxes. And she had discovered, to her own surprise, that she was very good at counting other people's boxes, and that she did not mind. She was on box 409 when her wrist plate chimed with a priority tone she had never heard outside a drill. She read it standing up in the cold, with her breath going white, in a hold that smelled of grain dust and machine oil. She read it 3 times. Then she said, "Excuse me," to the Sether cargo master, who had no idea what had happened and would remember for the rest of his life that the human girl said "excuse me," and she walked out of the hold and down the connecting tube and into her own ship's airlock, and she got the helmet off, and she sat down on the deck plating with her back against the lockers. Commander Yusuf Bell found her there 11 minutes later. He did not say anything. He sat down on the deck beside her, which was not a thing captains did, and which cost his knees something, and he stayed there. After a long time she said, 812 got off. Yes. Do we have the list? Not yet. When we have the list, she said, I want to see it. Ada. When we have the list, she said, I want to see it. They had the list at 3:40 the next morning. It came in as a flat text file with a header from the compact registry, and it was alphabetical, and Yusuf Bell brought it to her in the wardroom himself, because he was not going to let her open it alone. She scrolled to the O's. Okonjo Tio, age 11, hopper 4, seat overflow, survived. She read the line 11 times. She put her hand flat on the table. Then she scrolled up 2 lines because she had to, because you always do. Okonjo Nkuru, age 49, deceased. The wardroom of a 91-meter cutter is a very small room. There were 4 other people in it. Nobody moved. Ada Okonjo sat with her hand on the table and her eyes on the screen, and she did not make a sound. Her jaw worked once. Her shoulders came up and went down once, like something falling in a house at night. And then she stood, and she said, in a voice that came out almost normal, "Sir, I'm due on watch at 4. Yusuf Bell said, "Ada." "I'm due on watch at 4, sir," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He was 51 years old, and he had been in the fleet for 30 of them, and he had never in his life wanted so badly to order someone to go to bed. He said, "Watch is yours." She stood the watch. 4 hours, alone on the bridge of a customs cutter over a slush moon, 411 light-years from the crater where her mother had been a schoolteacher. She logged the traffic. She noted the drift. She checked the reactor trim at the top of every hour, the way you are supposed to. At 7:11 she keyed a private channel to the compact registry and requested the full casualty roll of Ilsa's landing, not the survivors, the dead. And the registry, which was a machine and had no opinions, sent her 214,306 names in a file that took 9 seconds to arrive. She opened it. She began to read. She read for the last 49 minutes of her watch, and she did not skim, and she did not scroll fast, and she moved her lips slightly, the way she did when she counted boxes. Aaron Petra, Abadi Sami, Abadi Yusra, Abbott Cleve. When her relief came at 800, she closed the file and stood, and passed the watch in the proper words and went below. She did not know then that she would finish that list. She did not know that she would still be reading it 14 months later, in a different chair, over a different world, with 500,000 ships holding station behind her and 9 billion people looking up. Humanity did not declare war for 19 days. This was noted across the galaxy, and it was misread everywhere. The Sodality's own intelligence directorate produced a summary on the 11th day, which concluded that the human response would be economic and diplomatic, a boycott, perhaps some tariffs, a great deal of noise in the assembly, and that the matter would be forgotten within a decade. The summary was 14 pages long, and it was, in its way, a masterpiece of reasonable analysis. Every fact in it was true. What the analysts could not see, because it was not the kind of thing that appears in intelligence summaries, was what humanity was actually doing during those 19 days. It was reading a list. The compact registry published the roll of the dead on the 3rd day, all 214,306 names, in plain text, unsorted by rank or worth or usefulness, and it did not publish a summary, and it did not publish a total on the front page. It published the names. And on 91 worlds and in 11,000 orbital habitats, and on the decks of 40,000 ships in transit between them, human beings opened that file and started at the top and read. They read it in schools. They read it in shipyards over the intercom, while the yard crews stood with their helmets off. They read it in the corridors of the assembly at VAR, 2 delegates at a time in shifts for 4 days, until the speaker's office asked them politely to stop and they said no. On a mining rig in the Kessel Belt, a man named Havard Pike, who owned an ore tug called the Ambergris, and who had been born on Tarn and had left it at 19 swearing never to go back, sat in his galley and read the list out loud to nobody for 11 hours. And when he reached the P's, he found his brother, and his brother's wife, and their 3 children, and he stopped, and he sat in the dark for a long time. And then he went aft and started stripping the mast driver off his ore rig and rewiring it. He was not told to do that. Nobody told anybody to do anything in those 19 days. That was the thing. On the 19th day, the Terran Compact's legislature did not pass a declaration of war. It passed the Muster Act, which was 4 sentences long, and which had been written in one night by a committee of 11 people who had all read the list. The first sentence said that the destruction of the settlement at Ilsa's Landing was an act of war by the Vhelt Sodality against the human species. The second sentence said that the Compact would prosecute that war against the war fleet and the war-making apparatus of the Sodality, and against no other thing, and that the deliberate killing of a Vhelt civilian by any human hull would be tried as murder in a human court, without exception, without mitigation, and without regard to provocation. The third sentence said that any registered human vessel of any class and any tonnage might answer the muster, that in answering it became a warship of the Compact and its master an officer of the Compact, and that no vessel which answered would be turned away. The fourth sentence was not a legal provision at all, and 3 separate lawyers tried to strike it, and it survived anyway, and it read, "The dead will be named." The muster went out on a Tuesday. It went out on the common band, unencrypted in 91 languages, and it did not ask for volunteers, and it did not appeal to honor or to vengeance. It stated a time and a place. It stated that the fleet would gather at a dead star called Anvil, a burnt-out cinder with nothing around it but rock, and that it would depart from Anvil in 300 days, and that the compact would supply what it could and could not supply everything, and that no one was obliged to come. Then it read the first 400 names. That was all. The broadcast was 31 minutes long, and 27 of those minutes were names. The Sether Attaché Kelthanu Riss was in his office at VAR when the first hulls began to move, and he did not understand what he was looking at for nearly a month. The traffic data was public. Anyone could pull it. What it showed at first was noise, a slight uptick in human commercial departures, a scattering of course changes, freight contracts quietly broken and the penalties quietly paid. His analysts flagged nothing. The human navy, those 2,940 hulls, had not moved at all. They were still sitting where they had always sat, on their custom stations and their revenue patrols, and as long as they sat there, Riss's people reported, nothing was happening. But Riss had a habit, acquired over 6 years of watching a species nobody else thought was worth watching, of reading the small feeds, the port bulletins, the registry filings, the obituaries. And so it was Riss, and not any intelligence directorate in the galaxy, who first saw it. On the 11th day after the muster, the ore tug *Ambergris*, 31,000 tons, 1 crew, filed a change of registry. Class, Warship. Master, Havard Pike. Destination, Anvil. On the 14th day, the grain hauler Cold Harbor Rose *, 11 crew, filed the same, and the survey boat Wilhelmina *, 4 crew, and the passenger liner *Star of Ceylon *, which had carried honeymooners between the inner worlds for 40 years and had a ballroom with a real wooden floor, filed a change of registry listing her class as warship and her armament as *None, pending. On the 20th day, 4,000 hulls filed. On the 40th day, 31,000. Riss stopped sleeping properly. He built a spreadsheet, which he did not report to his government, because he could not yet make himself write down the number the spreadsheet was producing. Because they were not warships. That was the thing he kept coming back to, turning it over, unable to make it mean anything. They were tugs. They were seed ships and dredgers and hospital ferries and cable layers and school ships and long-haul bulk carriers with hulls so thin you could put a hole in them with a hard look. They had no shields worth the name. They had no fleet doctrine. Most of them had no weapons at all, and the ones that did had mining lasers and rock splitters and asteroid drivers. The Sodality's 9th Correction Fleet alone had 340 ships of the line, each one capable, Riss had run the numbers 11 times, of destroying 100 such hulls before its own screens failed. And the humans knew that. They had to know that. Their own admiralty published the comparison. They published it. It was in every human newsfeed, a bar chart showing what a Vhelt ship of the line could do to a grain hauler, and beneath it the caption, "This is what answering the muster means. Read it before you file." They published the arithmetic of their own slaughter, and the hulls kept filing. Riss wrote in his private log, "I have made an error somewhere in my understanding of this species, and I cannot find it." Adaeze Okonjo did not go to Anvil to fight. She was assigned, 6 weeks after the muster, to the Register. The Register was not a warship and not a command. It was a compartment on the orbital station over Kepler Reach, and in it sat 40 people whose job was the 4th sentence of the Muster Act. The dead will be named. Somebody had to work out what that actually meant operationally, and the somebody turned out to be 40 clerks and a lieutenant who could count. They started with the roll. 214,306 names, and the fleet, whatever the fleet turned out to be, would read them. That was the plan in the beginning. The flagship would read the names over the enemy's world, and it would take, they calculated, about 11 days of continuous transmission, and no flagship could hold station over a hostile planet for 11 days. It was a corporal named Davy Ramnarine who solved it, at 300, with her feet on a desk. "Split it," she said. "Every hull that answers takes a share. 500 names each, 10,000 hulls, that's the whole roll in one pass." Ada looked at her for a long moment. "Not 500, she said. "Fewer. If more hulls come, fewer names each." "Sure. Whatever the count is." "So we don't know the share until we know the count," Ada said slowly, "and we won't know the count until they're all there. So we computed at Anvil." Ada sat down. She pulled a slate over. She wrote at the top of a blank page, "NAMES per hull equals 214,306/N, and she stared at the letter N for a while. She said, "Davy, what if N is big?" N got big. They passed 100,000 hulls on day 91. Ada was in the register when the count rolled over, and nobody cheered, and somebody down the row said "God," very quietly, and then they all went back to work, because 100,000 hulls meant 100,000 crew manifests, and every manifest had to be read. That was the other half of the register's job, and it was the half nobody had planned for and the half that broke people. Because the ships were not numbers, they were crews, and the crews had names too. The Ambergris Asterisk, Havard Pike Master alone. The Cold Harbor Rose, 11 crew, 5 of them from one family, the youngest 19. The Asterisk Star of Ceylon, 44 crew and a ballroom with a real wooden floor, and her master had filed a note in the registry field marked Remarks Asterisk, which nobody was supposed to use, and the note said, "We will take the floor up and put a rail gun where it was." My grandmother danced on that floor. She would want the gun. The Wilhelmina Asterisk, 4 crew, a survey boat older than the Compact. The Asterisk 99 Bottles Asterisk, a beer hauler out of Bavani Station, crew of 6, all cousins. The Asterisk Thin Ice Asterisk, an ice tender, crew of 9, master aged 22. The Marigold Asterisk, the Patience Asterisk, the Asterisk Bright Cold Morning Asterisk, the Asterisk Hound of Ganymede Asterisk, the Kettle Cove. That one made Ada put her slate down and leave the compartment for 4 minutes, because the Kettle was the river that ran under the glass bridge, and the man who had named that tug had named it for a bridge that no longer existed and did not know, when he named it, that he would ever have a reason to. They came from everywhere. They came from mining consortia that ordered their entire fleets to Anvil and paid the crew's families a year's wages in advance. They came one at a time from asteroid claims and backwater docks, filed by masters who had to look up how to change a registry class because they had never changed anything in their lives. They came crewed by the old, who had nothing to lose, and by the young, who did not believe they could lose it. 11,000 hulls came from a single shipbreaker's yard on Callisto, derelicts, hulks, ships that had been half scrapped, dragged back out of the boneyard and welded shut, and fitted with engines that were older than the people flying them. And every one of them had a manifest, and every manifest had names, and the register read them all. Adaeze Okonjo did not sleep much that year. She read the roll of the dead in the morning, an hour of it every morning at her own insistence. She was up to the H's by day 200, and she read the roll of the living all day, and she stopped being able to tell, sometimes in the small hours, which list she was on. Davy found her once at 400 with her forehead on the desk, and asked if she wanted to be relieved. Ada said without lifting her head, "There's a hull called the Inkuru Asterisk." Davy was quiet. "Out of Perrin Station," Ada said. "Registered 11 days ago. Or Hopper, crew of 7, they renamed her." She lifted her head. Her eyes were dry and terrible. They renamed her for my mother, Davy. They don't know me. They just read the list. On day 240, the Compact's Admiralty did something that had no precedent in human military history, and which the Sodality, when it learned of it, took as final proof that the humans had lost their minds. It commissioned children. Not children, in fact, the youngest was 19, but the Sodality did not draw the distinction, and neither, entirely, did the humans. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. 500,000 hulls needed 500,000 masters who could hold a formation, and the fleet had 2,940 officers. There were merchant masters, and there were mining foremen, and there were tug pilots who could put a hull through a rock field in the dark. But somebody had to teach them the line, and the cadence, and the discipline, and there were not enough graybeards to go around. So the fleet took its lieutenants and its ensigns and its petty officers, 22 and 23 and 24 years old, and gave them ships, and gave them squadrons, and gave them 100 hulls each and 100 masters twice their age who had to be taught to hold station to the second. Commander Yusuf Bell came to Kepler Reach on day 241 to tell Ada in person, because he had known her since she was 18, and because he was 51 and had learned, somewhere along the line, that news like this should have a face attached. He found her in the register with a slate in her hand. He said, "They're giving me a squadron, 400 hulls." "Congratulations, sir. They're giving you the * second wind." Ada did not move. "You'll hold a section," Bell said. 90 hulls, freighters mostly, 2 or tugs, that liner with the ballroom. He paused. "Ada, I want you to hear this from me and not from an order. I put your name forward. You can say no." She looked at the slate in her hand. It had a name on it. It always had a name on it. "Sir," she said, "how many hulls have answered?" 491,000, as of this morning. She did the division in her head. She had been doing that division in her head for 8 months, and she did not need the slate. "That's less than half a name each," she said. "Ada." "They'll all get to read one," she said. "Every ship, every crew, nobody sits it out." She looked up at him. "Yes, sir, I'll take her." Anvil was a dead star. It had burned out before anything on Earth had learned to crawl, and it sat now in the black with 4 dead worlds, and a lot of rubble radiating almost nothing, useful for almost nothing. The Compact had chosen it because it was empty, and because it was 311 light-years from anywhere the Sodality cared about, and because a cinder like that gave a fleet something to hold station against. The first hulls arrived on day 261. They came in 1s and 2s out of transit, blinking their running lights, and they were met by a fleet tender that assigned them a station and a channel and a number, and then they sat. And more came, and more. By day 290, the volume of space around Anvil contained more human beings than any planet humanity had settled outside the Sol system. Adaeze Okonjo took the * second wind out of Kepler Reach on day 271, with 19 crew, of whom 11 had been aboard when she was a boarding officer counting boxes. She had been a lieutenant for 4 years. She had been a captain for 6 days. When she came out of transit at Anvil and the tender's channel opened and a bored voice said, "Second wind, welcome, hold at Mark 11. Section Commander Okonjo, that's you, ma'am. You've got 90 hulls waiting on you." She sat in the chair for 3 full seconds without breathing. Then she said, "Put me on the section band." They put her on. 90 ships, 90 masters, most of them 20 years older than she was, some of them 40, a few of them men and women who had been hauling freight since before she was born. She said, "This is Okonjo, Second Wind, Section Commander. I'm 23 years old and I've never held a formation bigger than 4. I'm going to be learning this at the same time you are, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Here's what I promise. I will not lie to you about what's coming. I will not spend one of you carelessly, and I will read your names." There was a silence on the band. Then a rough voice, unhurried, said, "Ambergris, copy that, second wind." And then 90 voices, one after another, in no order anybody had assigned, each one saying its own name into the dark. Cold Harbor Rose, Thin Ice, Marigold, Star of Ceylon, 99 Bottles, Patience, Hound of Ganymede. Kettle Cove. Adaeze Okonjo sat in her chair and listened to 90 ships say their names, and she wrote every one of them down by hand, on paper, because her hands needed something to do. They drilled for 40 days. This is the part that the Sodality's analysts, when they finally reconstructed it, could not make sense of, and it is the part that mattered more than any other. Because a fleet of 500,000 hulls is not a fleet. It is a crowd. It is the largest crowd in the history of the species, and a crowd in space at speed is a suicide. 2 hulls in a formation must hold their spacing or they collide. 10,000 hulls in a formation must hold their spacing or 10,000 hulls die without an enemy ever firing. And the human ships at Anvil were not built to hold spacing. They were freighters with sloppy thrusters and 100-millisecond control lag and engines that had been maintained by whoever was cheapest, and they were crewed by people who had spent their whole lives in the deep black, where the nearest other object was 4 hours away. So the fleet taught them the cadence. It was not complicated, that was the point. The cadence was a single tone broadcast on a dedicated band once per second forever. On the tone, you checked your mark. On the tone, you corrected, not when you noticed drift, not when it felt right. On the tone, 1 second, every second, for as long as the fleet existed. The fleet's instructors, lieutenants mostly, children with hoarse voices, did not explain the philosophy of it. They simply ran it 20 hours a day for 40 days. Hold your mark. Correct on the tone. Again. Again. A tug pilot out of the Kessel Belt who had 40 years in the black and had never once in his life taken an order about where to put his ship spent 9 days swearing about it. And on the 10th day he stopped swearing, because he had noticed that, when he corrected on the tone, the 400 ships around him were exactly where they were supposed to be always, and that this was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. By day 30, the section formations were holding to 200 meters. By day 38, the second wind S90 hulls were holding to 60. And on day 39, Fleet Marshal Ondine Sar ran the whole thing at once. 500,000 hulls, 1 tone, 1 second. The fleet's own recording of it is 9 minutes long and has no narration, and it is the most viewed piece of human media ever produced, and what it shows is this. A cloud of lights the size of a small solar system, drifting, incoherent, a fog of individual ships each with its own drift and its own lag and its own tired crew, and then the tone starts. And on the first tone, nothing much. And on the 10th, a suggestion of order. And on the 60th, the fog has edges. And on the 300th tone, 5 minutes in, 500,000 human ships are holding a formation 11 light seconds across to within 100 meters, and they are all correcting at once, every second, and the whole vast thing pulses, a flicker of drive glow running across it like a heartbeat, like something breathing. Not one ship, not a fleet, a crowd, uncountable, every hull with its own name and its own 19 people and its own bad thruster and its own reason for being there, moving as one thing. Kelthanu Riss saw that recording 11 days later, at VAR in his office at 3 in the morning. He watched it 4 times. Then he wrote a message to his government which contained no analysis and no recommendation and which read, in its entirety, "Do not stand in front of them." The register finished its count on day 298. Ada was not in the register anymore. She had a ship and 90 hulls and no time, but Davy Ramnarine called her on a private channel at 200, and her voice was strange. "We closed the roll," Davy said. "Give me the number." 499,982. Ada sat with that. It was so close. It was maddeningly, absurdly close, and she was too tired to know whether the closeness meant anything at all or whether it was the kind of thing tired people invent to have a feeling about. 18 short, she said. 18 short, Davy said. Ada, I've had 4 analysts ask me to just round it, call it 500,000. Nobody would ever check. No. That's what I said. Publish the real number, Ada said. 499,982. If it's not 500,000 then it isn't, and we don't lie about counts. Not on this. They published it at 600. At 11:40, a transit signature appeared on the anvil perimeter that nobody had scheduled. It was a scrapyard tender out of Callisto, 40 years past her rating, towing 17 hulks on a cable. Her master was a woman named Beatrice Solano, 68 years old, who ran a shipbreaking yard and who had already sent 11,000 hulls to Anvil, every ship in her boneyard, everything that would hold air. And when she read the published count that morning, she had gone out into her yard, where there was nothing left but scrap and slag and things too broken to fly, and she had found 17 hulls that could not fly, and she had welded them shut, and she had hooked them to her own tender on a cable, and she had come. They were not warships. They could not maneuver. They had no crew and no engines, and in 4 cases no bows. She filed her registry on the way in. Class, Warship 17 under tow. Master, Beatrice Solano. Remarks, you said no vessel that answers would be turned away. Check your arithmetic. 17 hulks, and the tender that pulled them. 18. The register recomputed the count at 12:04 and published it. And on 500,000 ships the number came up on 500,000 screens. And Adaeze Okonjo, who had been awake for 26 hours and who did not cry easily, put her hands over her face on the bridge of her own ship in front of her own crew and made a sound that was not quite laughing. 500,000. And the register, which had been waiting 9 months to do this one piece of arithmetic, ran the division at last. 214,306 names, 500,000 ships. Not every ship got a name. Not quite. There were not enough dead to go around. So the register did the only fair thing, and it did it in 11 minutes. It assigned the names by lot, 1 name to each of 214,306 hulls, and to the remaining 285,694, it assigned a line instead. Every ship got a line. The ships without a name got the sentence that everyone would speak together at the end. Adaeze Okonjo's ship, the * Second Wind, drew a name by lot like everyone else, and the lot was blind and the register ran it and nobody touched it. She read the assignment at 3:30 in her cabin, alone. TCS Second Wind Okonjo Enkuro, age 49, schoolteacher. She sat on the edge of her bunk for a long time with the slate in her hands. Then she got up and went to the bridge and stood her watch. The fleet departed Anvil on day 301. It did not depart all at once, because 500,000 hulls cannot transit together and the sequencing alone took 9 hours. The fleet's 2,940 warships went first, the real ones, the spine, the cruisers and the destroyers and the ugly little frigates that had been built to chase smugglers and had been refitted for 11 months into something that could stand in a line. Then the sections. Then the crowd. They went out in silence. There were no speeches. Fleet Marshal Ondine Sar, 54 years old, a career officer, a woman who had spent her whole life expecting to retire without ever firing a shot, sent exactly 1 signal to the fleet before transit, and it was 11 words long. We go for the fleet that did it, nothing else, nothing more. The Vhelt Sodality learned that the humans were coming 11 days before they arrived, because the humans told them. The compact broadcast its intent on the open band, in the trade tongue, unencrypted, repeated on a loop, to every receiver in Sodality space and every neutral station within 400 light-years. It was not an ultimatum. It did not demand surrender. It informed. It said, the Ninth Correction Fleet destroyed the settlement at Ilsa's landing and killed 214,306 people. We are coming for the Ninth Correction Fleet and for the warships that defend it. We will not fire on your worlds. We will not fire on your cities. We will not fire on any vessel that is not armed and not in our path. If you are a civilian of the Sodality, you are in no danger from us, and if any human hull harms you, that hull's master will be tried for murder before your own witnesses. Move your civilians away from your warships. We are coming for the Ninth. And then it read the names, all of them. 214,306, over 11 days, in a continuous transmission, on every band the Sodality's people could receive. The Sodality's Directorate of Information jammed it on the fourth day. They could not jam it everywhere. On Ilmara, the Sodality's homeworld, 9 billion people, the names came through on agricultural weather bands and orbital beacon channels, and the antique emergency frequencies that no government ever remembers to shut off. And by the 7th day, there were people on Ilmara listening to it deliberately, in basements, in the dark, writing the names down, because a thing repeated for 11 days stops being propaganda and starts being a fact. Over Marshal Sethusc-Vor heard it too aboard his flagship, and he listened to 11 minutes of it and then ordered it silenced on his own ship. And it was, and the silence that followed was worse. He was not a fool. He had seen the traffic estimates. He had been told the number, and he had refused to believe it, and then he had been shown the recording of the cadence, the pulse, the breathing thing, 500,000 hulls correcting as one, and he had believed it, and he had gone into his cabin and closed the hatch. What he understood, and what his government did not, was that the number was not the threat. The threat was that they had come asterisk in order. A mob you can break. A mob comes apart when it starts to die. But those hulls were not a mob, and they were not soldiers either. They were farmers and haulers and shipbreakers, 5 million of them, and they had spent 9 months learning to hold a line, and they had crossed 300 light years to hold it here, and every single one of them had been handed a name to read. They would not break. They had not come to survive. They had come to finish something. Sethusc-Vor sat in his cabin with his crest flat against his skull, and he composed, and deleted, and composed again, a message to the sovereign marches recommending that the Sodality surrender the Ninth Correction Fleet, himself included, for trial. He never sent it. The marches had already given their order. The Ninth would stand, and the Home Guard would stand with it, and the humans would break themselves on 11,000 warships in the sky over Ilmara, and the galaxy would watch it happen. 11,000 ships of the line. 500,000 hulls. The Sodality's own war college had run the simulation 400 times, and the Sodality won all 400, and every simulation had assumed that when the killing started, the crowd would run. They came out of transit at the edge of the Ilmara system at 400 fleet time, and they came out in order. That was the first thing the Sodality's censor officers reported, and the first thing nobody believed. A fleet that size, transiting from 300 light years, should have arrived as a smear. Hulls scattered across 4 hours and 11 million kilometers, straggling in for a day, easy meat for a fast interceptor screen. Instead, the humans came out of transit inside a window 9 minutes wide, 500,000 hulls, already in formation, already holding the tone. The Sodality censor officers watched their boards fill up, and keep filling up. One of them, a junior rating named Veshanu, later testified that she had assumed the display was faulty, because no display she had ever seen had needed to draw that many contacts, and the software had never been tested at that scale, and it began to lag, and then it stopped updating, and then it simply printed a number in the corner instead of drawing the ships at all. The number was 500,000. She said at the inquiry that the worst part was not the number. The worst part was that they were not moving toward the planet. They were moving toward the fleet. Adaeze Okonjo held her section at the left shoulder of the human line, 90 hulls, 1 second at a time. The *second wind was 91 meters long and had 4 pop guns and a hull you could dent with a wrench, and she was the strongest ship in her section, and every one of the 90 knew it. She keyed the section band at 411. This is Okonjo. Cadence is good, spacing is good. You're doing better than the fleet ships, and I want you to know that. A ripple of something on the band, not laughter, but its cousin. Listen to me. The order of battle is this. The 9th is in the second line behind the home guard. We are going to take the home guard's right, and we are going to hold it open. That is all we do. We do not chase. We do not break formation to help a friend. If a ship beside you is dying, you hold your mark and you keep going, and you let her die, and that is not cruelty. That is the only way any of us live. Silence. Cold Harbor. Rose acknowledge. Rose acknowledges. Thin ice. Ice acknowledges. A young voice, 22. Star of Ceylon. Ceylon acknowledges. A pause. Ma'am, the floor's up and the gun's in. Grandmother would be pleased. Ambergris. A long moment. Ambergris acknowledges, said Havard Pike. Ada looked at that name on her board for a second longer than she should have. She had read his file. She had read everybody's file. She knew about the brother and the brother's wife and the 3 children in the peas. Ambergris, she said, stay on my shoulder. Where else would I be, said Pike. The home guard came out to meet them at 4:47, and the battle over Ilmera began. And it was not a battle in any sense the Sodality's War College had prepared for. 11,000 Vhelt ships of the line, each of them faster, tougher, and better armed than anything the humans had brought except the 2,940. They opened with a coordinated volley from 12 light seconds, and it was beautifully done, and it killed 4,000 human hulls in 11 seconds. 4,000. Ada saw it happen on her board. 4,000 contacts, and then 31,000 fewer people in the universe, and it took less time than it takes to read a sentence. And the line did not break. That was the moment. Everything afterward was consequence. Because the Vhelt gunnery officers had done their work perfectly, and they had done it in a way that should have shattered any formation ever flown. They had gutted the center. They had punched holes 11 ships wide through the mass of the crowd, and every doctrine in the galaxy said that what happens next is that the survivors shear off, because a ship that has just watched the 4 hulls around it turn to gas does not hold its mark. It cannot. Nothing that wants to live can. But the tone kept coming, 1 per second, and on the tone, 496,000 human hulls checked their mark and corrected. The holes closed. They closed the way water closes. Not because anyone gave an order, there was no order, there was no time for an order, but because 500,000 crews had spent 40 days learning that when the tone comes, you go to your mark, and their marks were where the dead ships had been, and so they went there. The formation swallowed its own wounds and kept coming, and it did not slow down, and the drive glow rippled across it, and it breathed. Aboard the flagship of the Home Guard, a fleet officer named Dulcethic watched the holes close on his display and said, aloud to nobody, "They are not going to stop." They did not stop. The human line came on at 4% of light, and it closed. And when it closed, the numbers stopped mattering in the way the War College had assumed they would. A Vhelt ship of the line could destroy 100 human hulls. It could. The math was right. But it could only destroy them one at a time, and it took 11 seconds to cycle its main battery, and in 11 seconds 400 human hulls could reach it, and a mining laser designed to cut through 800 meters of nickel iron does not particularly care that it was not designed to be a weapon. The ore tugs went in first, because they were the toughest things in the crowd, slab-sided, over-engined, built to shove asteroids. And they went in with their rock splitters, and they died in the thousands, and they opened the home guard screens like a can. Then the freighters came through the holes. There is a recording taken by a Sether observation post at the system's edge that ran on every newsfeed in the galaxy for a year. It shows a Vhelt ship of the line, 1,100 meters, the pride of a species, killing human ships. It kills 11. It kills 20. It kills 40. Its screens are holding. Its batteries are cycling. It is doing everything right. And you can see in the recording the moment the crew realizes they are winning. Every exchange they are winning. And it does not matter because there is no end to them. Because behind the 40 they killed there are 400, and behind the 400 there are 4,000, and the 4,000 are holding formation, and they are correcting on the tone, and they are still coming, and their names are on their hulls where anyone can read them. Marigold Patience, Bright Cold Morning, 99 bottles, Kettle Cove. The ship of the line dies at 11 minutes into the recording. It is killed by an ice tender. Adaeze Okonjo fought her section for 6 hours and 20 minutes, and she gave 9 orders in that whole time, and she counted, and she did not stop counting. Thin Ice died at 5:21, 22-year-old master, crew of 9, going in on a cruiser's engine housing with a rock splitter at full burn. She got through the housing. The cruiser went dark. The asterisk Thin Ice did not come out. Ada said, "Thin Ice is gone, hold your marks." 99 bottles died at 6:04, 6 cousins. They had painted a joke on the hull at Anvil and nobody would ever read it now. Ada said, 99 bottles is gone, hold your marks. Kettle Cove died at 6:30, crew of 9. Ada put her hand flat on the arm of her chair and said, "Kettle Cove is gone, hold your marks." And her voice did not change, and Davy Narration, who had come aboard as her censor officer because she had asked to and because there was no one to say no, looked at the back of her captain's head and understood something about human beings that she would never afterward be able to explain to anyone. Cold Harbor Rose died at 7:02, 11 crew, 5 from one family. Marigold asterisk 7:14. Patience asterisk 7:40. Star of Ceylon took a hit at 7:55 that opened her from the bow to the ballroom, and she did not die. She came apart slowly over 11 minutes, venting, and her master kept the rail gun firing the whole time, and the last thing he sent on the section band was, "Ceylon is off station, ma'am. Sorry about the formation." Ada said, "Formation's fine, Ceylon." "Read her name, would you?" "I will." The asterisk Star of Ceylon had drawn a name by lot, like everyone else. Her name was a 9-year-old girl from the 3rd Dome. Ada read it into the section band while the ship was still burning, and 44 people heard their own ship's name read, and then they were gone. The 9th Correction Fleet broke at 10:11. Not the Home Guard. The Home Guard fought until there was nothing left to fight with, and 11,000 ships of the line died over their own world, and there is no dishonor in the record of how they died. But the 9th was behind them, and the 9th was 340 ships, and the 9th had never in its existence fought anything that could shoot back. They had spent 100 years correcting settlements. When the human line came through the wreck of the Home Guard, the 9th ran. Over Marshal Sethus did not give the order. His captains gave it themselves, one after another, ship by ship, and they broke for the transit limit, and they scattered. And the thing they did not understand, the thing that had been in front of them for 11 days and that they had refused to look at, was that they were running from a fleet that had 500,000 hulls and therefore could afford to run in every direction at once. The humans did not chase them with a squadron, they chased them with a wall. Fleet Marshal Ondine Sar had planned for this from the first week at Anvil, and it was the only piece of true tactical genius in the entire campaign, and it consisted of understanding what 500,000 ships were actually for. You do not use them to fight. You use them to make the volume of space in which a thing can exist smaller and smaller until it does not exist. The ninth ran for the limit, and the limit was a sphere, and the sphere was full of freighters. It took 90 minutes. Sethuskvor's flagship was the last. It was a fine ship. It had a name that meant, in the Vhelt tongue, *necessary instrument, and it fought well at the end, better than it had ever fought, better than the man who commanded it deserved, and it was killed at 11:48 by 4 ore tugs and a hospital ferry that had refused, at Anvil, to be reclassified as anything but a warship. The over-marshal died at his post. He had in the last minutes sent one final transmission to the Sovereign Marches, on a channel the humans were reading, and made no attempt to jam. It said, "They are not barbarians, they are worse, they are a people who have decided." At 11:49, the shooting stopped. Not tapered off, stopped. The last Vhelt warship in the Ilmara system was gone, and on the human band the cadence tone went on, once per second, unchanged, and 476,000 human hulls held their marks, and the sky over Ilmara was full of wreckage and full of humans, and there was nothing left to shoot at. 9 billion people looked up. Everything on Ilmara that could throw a shadow was throwing one. The wreckage of 11,000 warships was still burning in the upper atmosphere, streaking down in long white lines that would fall for 3 days. And above the wreckage, holding a formation 11 light seconds across, in a lattice so vast that from the ground it looked like a second constellation had been nailed across the sky, sat 500,000 human ships. They did not fire. The planetary defense grid, what was left of it, 400 ground batteries and a chain of orbital forts, fired on them for 19 minutes. It killed 11 human hulls. The humans did not return fire. Fleet Marshal Sar's order, given at 11:50, was 4 words long, and it went out on the fleet band and on the open band and to every receiver on the planet below, and it was, "Nobody shoots at Ilmara." And then, because she had been a career officer for 31 years and knew exactly what she was standing on top of, she added, "That is a lawful order, and I will hang the master of any hull that disobeys it. There will be no exceptions. There will be no accidents. Section commanders, take your rolls and report." The rolls took 2 hours. Adaeze Okonjo took hers on the section band, and it was the worst thing she had ever done, and she did it in a flat, steady voice, and she did not skip a single name. Ambergris. Here Pike's voice ragged. Bright cold morning. Nothing. Bright cold morning. Nothing. Cold Harbor Rose. Nothing. Hound of Ganymede. Here, ma'am, barely. Kettle Cove. Nothing. Marigold. Nothing. She went through all 90, 31 answered. 59 did not. She sat in her chair on the bridge of the *second wind, with the list in front of her, and the tone going once a second in her ear. And behind her 19 people were very carefully not looking at her. And below her 9 billion strangers were staring up at the sky, waiting to find out whether they were going to die. Across the whole fleet, the number came in at 1:30 the next morning. 24,109 human hulls destroyed. 311,412 human dead. Which was, Ada noticed, because she could not help noticing, more than the entire population of Ilsa's landing. She sat with that for a long time. Then she opened the register's file and found the name that had been assigned by lot to the *second wind*, and she looked at it, and she waited for the fleet's orders, and she thought for the first time in 14 months with a clarity that frightened her about how easy it would be, right now, with 500,000 ships and nobody left to stop them, to make the arithmetic even. The Ambergris left formation at 4:17. Ada was asleep, 20 minutes of it in her chair, the first in 2 days, when Davy Ramnarin's hand closed on her shoulder and Davy's voice said, very quietly, "Ma'am." Pike's off his mark. Ada was awake before her eyes were open. How far? 1,100 kilometers and opening. He's under full burn. A pause. He's headed down. The board showed it. One contact out of 500,000, sliding out of the lattice like a loose tooth, and every ship around it holding station because holding station was the only thing they had been taught to do. "Get me his telemetry," Ada said, "all of it." It came up in 9 seconds, and it was very bad. The ambergris was an ore tug. Her whole reason for existing was the mass driver bolted along her spine, a rail that could take a 50-ton slug of nickel iron and throw it hard enough to move an asteroid. Havard Pike had stripped that driver at Anvil and rebuilt it, and he had used it in the battle, and it had done good work. He had one slug left. He had been carrying it for 14 months. And he was going down the well with it, and at the velocity his tug could reach in the next 11 minutes, a 50-ton slug dropped into an atmosphere would not be a weapon. It would be a geological event. Davy said, "Ma'am, he's targeting Sethvera, southern continent, population." She stopped. "Say it." 41 million. Ada stood up. "Fleet's seen it," Davy said. "Marshal Saar has authorized weapons free on the *ambergris*. 6 fleet destroyers are moving to intercept. They'll have a firing solution in 4 minutes. 4 minutes? Ada looked at the board. 6 warships, the real kind, the Spine, converging on a 31,000-ton ore tug with 1 man aboard. It would take them 1 shot. It would not even be difficult. And the whole galaxy was watching. Every neutral observation post in the system had its instruments open. Kelthanu Riss himself was out there at the system's edge, 400 million kilometers away, watching the feed with his hands flat on the desk. Whatever happened in the next 4 minutes would be the thing that the galaxy remembered about human beings for the next 1,000 years. Adaeze Okonjo, 23 years old, said, "Davy, put me on his private channel and put the private channel on the open band. All of it. Every receiver in the system. The neutrals, the fleet, and the planet." Davy stared at her. "Ma'am, if this goes wrong." "If this goes wrong," Ada said, "they should see it." "Havard." The channel was open for 4 seconds before he answered. "Don't," he said. "Havard, it's Ada." "I know who it is." His voice was not wild. That was the terrible thing. It was level and reasonable and utterly tired, and it was the voice of a man who has done all of his shouting a long time ago. "Don't try, second wind. I've had 14 months to think about this and you've had 4 minutes. "That's true," Ada said. "So don't." "Havard, they're going to kill you. 6 destroyers, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "I know." "They'll kill you before the slug's away." "They might," he agreed. "They might not. It's a long shot either way, and I've taken worse." On the second wind S bridge nobody moved. On 470,000 hulls, human beings sat and listened. On the planet below, in 9 billion homes and shelters and basements, people who did not speak the language sat and listened to a translation crawling across their screens. "Tell me about the slug," Ada said. A pause. 50 tons, Pike said. "Nickel iron. I cut it out of a rock in the Kessel Belt 11 years ago." "Where's it going?" "Sethvera." "What's in Sethvera, Havard?" Silence. "Havard, what's in Sethvera?" "Nothing," he said. 41 million of them and nothing else. No fleet base, no yards, nothing. His voice cracked once and reset. "That's the point, second wind, that's the whole point." There was nothing in Ilsa's landing either. Ada closed her eyes. 3 minutes, Davy said. "Havard," Ada said, "I have your file." "I don't care." Pike Marcus, age 44, Pike Amara, age 41, Pike Sella, age 14, Pike Jonah, age 11. She said them slowly the way she said all names, and she heard him make a sound. Pike Ruth, age 6. Stop it. I've read that list every morning for 14 months, she said. I'm on the R's. I know what's in it. I know your brother, and I know his wife, and I know the names of his children, and I am the only other person in this fleet who has read every single one of them, and I am telling you. Then you know why. He was shouting now. It was better. You asterisk know why you read it. 214,000, and they got a asterisk fine asterisk. Ada, they got a fine and a asterisk note in the minutes, and the whole galaxy went back to arguing about asterisk fish. Yes. So why asterisk? Because you drew a name, Ada said. The channel went quiet. 2 minutes 40, Davy whispered. Every hull drew a name, Ada said. You drew one. The register ran the lot and it gave you one, and you have been carrying it for 8 days. Read it to me, Havard. Nothing. Read it to me. She heard him breathing. She heard faintly the whine of an overloaded drive. Solving, he said. Anik, age 7. Age 7, Ada repeated. She's not mine, Pike said, and his voice broke completely, and there was nothing level in it now, nothing reasonable. I don't know her. I don't know who she was. I got a asterisk stranger asterisk. That's right. I wanted asterisk my Ruth, I wanted. I know. It's not fair, they gave me a stranger's child. Havard, Ada said, listen to me. That is not a mistake, that is the whole thing, that is the entire reason we did it this way. She leaned forward in the chair. 214,000 people died, and every single one of them was somebody's. Everyone. And there were not enough of us who loved them to carry them all, so 5 million strangers came, and each one picked up a piece, and we carried them here asterisk, 300 light years, and we did it in asterisk order asterisk, and we did not lose one. Her voice was shaking, and she let it. Anik Solving is 7 years old, and she belongs to you now, and there is nobody else. If you go down that well, Havard, if you do this, nobody reads her. She's the only one who doesn't get read. Out of all of them. Hers is the name that gets left out, because the man who was carrying it went to kill 41 million strangers instead. 90 seconds, Davy said. Ma'am, the destroyers have a solution. Tell them to hold, Ada said. They won't. Tell them to hold. Pike said very quietly, there's a man in Sethvara who is asleep right now. He's got a daughter. He didn't do anything to me. He doesn't even know my name. No, Ada said, he doesn't. He'll never know what He'll never know what you didn't do either, Ada said. That's what it is, Havard, that's what it costs. You do it and nobody thanks you, and you carry it, and the only person in the universe who knows what it cost you is you. She gripped the arm of the chair. You've been carrying a 50-ton slug for 14 months. You can carry this. You've had the practice. Silence. Long silence. 60 seconds. Havard, Ada said, come back to your mark. And on the open band, on the band the whole galaxy was listening to, 91 voices, no. 30 voices. 30 ships. What was left of a section of 90, the survivors of the asterisk second wind asterisk S command, none of whom had been ordered to say anything at all, began to speak. Hound of Ganymede, come back Ambergris. Wilhelmina, come back Havard. Ankuru, come back. And then it spread, the way things spread in a crowd, without organization, without permission, hull by hull across 11 light seconds of formation. 100 voices, 1,000, 40,000, 400,000 ships that had never heard of Havard Pike and did not know what he had lost, saying the same thing on the open band in 91 languages until the channel was nothing but noise. And the noise was one word, and the word was come back. 9 billion people heard it. The ambergris cut her burn at 18 seconds. She hung there, 31,000 tons of ore tug, nose down over a world she could have broken, with a 50-ton slug in her rail and a man weeping at her controls. And then her attitude thrusters fired, and she turned very slowly like something old and tired, and she began to climb back toward her mark. She took 11 minutes to get there. Nobody said anything to her when she arrived. That was a decision, and it was made by 470,000 people simultaneously, and there is no explaining it. She slid into her slot on the lattice at the left shoulder of the human line, and she found her mark, and on the next tone she corrected. And the fleet went back to holding station. Havard Pike was arrested 9 hours later by Fleet Marshal Saar's order, and he was tried, 11 months after that, by a human court for attempted murder. He pleaded guilty, he refused counsel, he was sentenced to 22 years. And the second sentence of the Muster Act had said without exception, without mitigation, and without regard to provocation, and the court applied it, and the galaxy watched a human being go to prison for something he had not done, and had almost done, and had stopped himself from doing. Kelthanu Riss attended every day of that trial. He wrote in his private log on the last day, "I have found my error. I assumed that a species with 500,000 warships would use them. I have watched them build the largest fleet in the history of this galaxy for the single purpose of not being able to use it on the people it was angriest at. They did not restrain themselves because they were merciful. They restrained themselves because they had written it down in advance when they were calm, and then they kept the promise while they were mad with grief, and they punished the one man who nearly broke it, and he agreed with the sentence. I am 50 years old, and I have been a diplomat since I was 19, and I did not know until this year that a thing like that was possible." The reading began at 600 on the 4th day, and it lasted 11 minutes. That was all. 14 months of work, 300 light-years of transit, 24,000 ships destroyed, and 311,000 human dead. And the thing they had crossed the galaxy to do took 11 minutes, because there were 500,000 of them, and they did it all at once. It was broadcast on every band. The Sodality could not have jammed it if it had tried, and by then the Sodality was no longer trying, because the Sovereign Marches had stopped issuing orders at all, and their Directorate of Information had locked its doors from the inside. 9 billion people on Ilmara looked up at a sky full of foreign warships that had spent 4 days doing absolutely nothing to them. And the sky spoke. It did not speak in one voice. That was the thing nobody was ready for, not the Vhelt, not the neutrals, not even the humans. 500,000 ships transmitted simultaneously on an open frequency, and what came out of every receiver on that planet was not a message. It was a sound like a sea. It was millions of human voices, layered, overlapping, none of them louder than any other, none of them coordinated, each one reading its own name at its own pace in its own language with its own broken accent. And the effect on the ground was of standing under something enormous that was murmuring. Later the Sether would build a machine to unpick it, and they would separate the layers out, one by one, and they would publish the result, and it is in every archive in the galaxy. TCS Second Wind, Okonjo Nkuru. Age 49, schoolteacher. Ambergris Solving Anik, age 7. Hound of Ganymede, Ferris Michael, age 62, dome mechanic. Wilhelmina, Idohana, age 30, hydroponics. Nkuru Abara Tulu, age 19. 214,306 of them, spoken once each, at the same time in 11 minutes by strangers. And then, in the silence after, because 285,000 ships had drawn no name and had been given a line instead. 250,000 human ships said the same sentence together, and it went through the atmosphere of Ilmara like weather. We came for the ones who did it. We are done. We are going home. They left the next morning. They took 9 hours to transit out, because 500,000 hulls always take 9 hours, And for 9 hours the people of Ilmara stood on their roofs and in their fields and in the streets of their cities and watched a fleet that could have ended their species take itself apart, ship by ship, and go away. They left behind 3 things. They left their dead, 24,000 hulls still in orbit, and the compact asked the Sodality in a formal note with a request for permission to leave them there, unsalvaged, as a marker. The request was granted by a government that no longer existed by the time it was delivered. They left the evidence. Every scrap the compact had. The orbital imagery of Ilsa's landing, the 40-minute notice, the 11-line report with the word correction in it 4 times, and Sethus-Kvor's own transmissions, unedited, uncut, dumped raw onto the Sodality's public networks and mirrored on 900 neutral relays. The humans did not editorialize. They did not need to. And they left the names. The sovereign marches fell 11 weeks later, and no human ship fired a shot to bring it down. It fell because 40 million people stood in the plaza at Ilmara City in a silence that lasted 4 hours, and because there is nothing a government can do about that. 2 of the marches took their own lives. 4 were tried by their own people. The rest ran and were found. The assembly at Var took up the matter of the 3rd provision the following year and struck it from the code by a vote of 391 to 9, and the human delegate, the same small woman with the flat, exhausted voice, was not present for the vote. She was on a shuttle to Tarn. She had asked to be excused. Kelthanu Riss resigned his post and spent the last 30 years of his life writing a history of the muster. It runs to 4 volumes. The first 3 are about ships. The 4th is nothing but names, and he set the names in the order the register drew them, by lot, so that no one is more important than anyone else, and he did not write a word of commentary in it, and it is the volume that people read. The glass bridge over the Kettle River was rebuilt on the 11th anniversary. They rebuilt it out of the old glass. Divers went into the frozen river and brought up the pieces, every one they could find, and the pieces were fused back together with new silica between them, and so the bridge that stands there now is scarred all over with seams. A bridge made of a broken bridge, and you can see every crack. They painted it green. Adaeze Okonjo came for the opening. She was 34 by then. She had left the fleet at 28, which surprised everybody except the people who knew her, and she worked for the register, which had never been dissolved and never would be, and her job was the thing it had always been. She read the list. She came off the shuttle in a coat that was too big for her, and her brother met her at the field. Tio Okonjo was 22. He had grown into a tall, quiet man with their mother's hands, and he taught school in the new dome, 31 children, and he had never once in his life gone into space and never intended to. They walked out to the bridge together in the cold. It was crowded. Half the colony was there, the new colony, the 812 who had come back and the 40,000 who had come after, because people had come from everywhere to a cratered rock nobody wanted, for no reason except that they had read a list once. At the center of the bridge, there was a slab of black stone. It had 214,306 names on it, cut small, and it was very large, and when you stood next to it you could not read the top and you could not read the bottom, and you understood in your body, in a way no number can make you understand, what 214,000 of anything actually is. On the base of the slab there was one more line in 11 languages, and it was not a boast, and it did not mention the fleet, and it did not mention the Sodality, and the people who carved it argued for a year about whether to put the number on it, and in the end decided not to. It said every one of them was somebody's. Ada stood in front of it with her hands in her pockets. Tio said quietly, "They keep asking me about the ships." "Who does?" "The children every year," he shrugged. "They want to know how many. They always want to know how many. 500,000, they can't hold it. They just say the number and it doesn't mean anything. It's just a big word." He looked at her. "What do I tell them?" Ada was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Tell them it wasn't 500,000 ships." Tia waited. "It was 500,000 crews," she said. "It was Beatrice Solano welding shut 17 hulks that couldn't fly and towing them 300 light years on a cable because she'd counted, and we were 18 short. It was 6 cousins in a beer hauler out of Bavani. It was a liner that took up her own ballroom floor to fit a gun, and her master, who was 70, and who asked me to read his ship's name while he was dying because he wanted to know the girl he'd carried got said out loud." Her breath went white in the cold. "It was a man with 1 slug left and every reason in the universe, 40 seconds from killing 41 million people who had never done anything to him, who turned around. That's the number, Tio. Not the ships. The turning around." She put her hand flat on the black stone. "The galaxy thought we sent 500,000 warships because we were angry," she said. "We were angry. Anybody can be angry with 500,000 warships. That's the easiest thing in the world." She found the line she had come 400 light years to touch, low on the left in the O's, and she rested 2 fingers on it. "We sent 500,000 warships," Adaeze Okonjo said, "so that we could stand over 9 billion people who deserved nothing from us, with every gun in human history pointed down, and put them away, and say her name and go home." The wind came up off the frozen river. Behind them, on the bridge, the colony had begun to read.